Greetings, everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of our Nurse Trauma Healing Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lorre, and I am a nurse scientist, author, and trauma burnout expert. And today, I am going to be making a very big announcement, so please do stay tuned to the end of the episode. This container is expanding, and I am super excited to share some news with you. But first, I really want to prioritize our nurse neighbors to the north. If you're in the US, I want to share some news about and some success. I mean, not only is it challenges and newsworthy, but some success that our Canadian nurses have been experiencing after long, hard-fought negotiations. So, as a nurse scholar and educator, I have examined health systems for most developed countries with curiosity about how nurses are experiencing their roles worldwide, independent of healthcare system design. Well, and the bottom line is this, that nurses worldwide, independent of this type of system in which they practice, independent of the org chart that informs how these structures and processes affect outcomes, right? All the leadership stuff. Despite different systems, nurses are still being marginalized, oppressed, and they're often working in dangerous conditions with dangerous staffing ratios. So this really, really speaks at a global level to the avoidable nurse-specific traumatization known as historical trauma. This is generation after generation after generation of nurses who have been and continue to be, in many settings worldwide, treated as second-class citizens. And, well, it's just not okay that these structures are deeply embedded in health systems worldwide. So let's check in with our Canadian nurses and share their stories, their experiences, so we can all connect in a heart-centered manner as we embark upon our individual and collective healing journey. To provide some context, I'm gonna drop an infographic in the show notes that really highlight the key demographics for the international nursing crisis. And let me just take a moment to really highlight some of these challenges. So here and I'll just discuss the United States and Canada, but I also have there in the infographic for you the United Kingdom and Australia. So here in the US, we have 96% of nurses that have one or more PTSD symptom. 21% meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. More than 83%, 81 to 83, depending upon your source, are burned out or don't feel supported at work. And we all know, if you've been here for longer than a minute, that burnout is more often than not nurse-specific traumatization. 80% are working in understaffed units, 50% do not feel safe at work. 1 in 2 nurses in the United States do not feel safe at work. 72% are dissatisfied or indifferent about their role, and 33 are angry, isolated, and depressed. Now, the Canadians are having similar challenges, and when you're doing international research, you can't really always get apples to apples research that lines up. But what we have in Canada is very similar. It's at the last time I checked, 83% were extremely stressed, understaffed, burned out. 46% of Canadian nurses have been physically assaulted more than 10 times. Let's just be with that for a minute as I wrap each and every one of those nurses in so much light and love. Almost 1 in 2 Canadian nurses have been physically assaulted more than 10 times. Are you kidding me? This is not okay. There are 23,000 nurse vacancies, 190% increase in LPN vacancies, and 24% of nurses, nearly 1 in 4 nurses in Canada, plans to exit the profession or their role in the next 3 years. So when we talk about a nursing crisis, we are talking about an international phenomenon. So recently, the Canadian Mental Health Association shared some data. And after reviewing a stack of reports and news articles and firsthand accounts from nurses, they mirror those conversations that we've had in prior podcast episodes. The unsafe and often toxic work systems and cultures, the dangerous staffing ratios, the below market wages that don't even begin to keep up with the inflationary cost of living, nurses bringing their own supplies from home, not necessarily for medical care per se, but to create comfort packs for patients' loved ones as the patient approaches the end of their life transition, sometimes in a hospital setting, often unexpectedly and very dramatically. These factors and more have led to the nurses in Canada, like everywhere else, to be overworked, overstressed, burned out, and outright traumatized in their roles. The Canadian Mental Health Association reports that, generally speaking, 1 in every 5 Canadians, and this includes nurses, even for whom statistics are much higher, experience a mental health issue each year. 1 in 5. According to a recent survey by the Canadian Federations of Nurses Union, CFNU, 60% of Canadian nurses report experiencing high levels of burnout, which, as you know by now, is actually the tip of a much bigger nurse-specific traumatization iceberg. Additionally, 50% of nurses reported feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, while 41% are feeling anxious or depressed, all of which overlap with the symptoms of nurse-specific traumatization. Let's unpack together the top 10 concerns of nurses in Canada and see how they stack up against the country in which you live. Number 1, staffing and workload challenges. Nurses in Ontario and Canada are facing severe understaffing, leading to heavy workloads and concerns about patient safety. Of course, this is a form of nurse-specific traumatization that must be addressed. Compensation and benefits. Nurses are seeking fair and competitive compensation, as well as improved benefits and retirement packages. This reflects the historical legacies of nurse-specific patriarchal trauma that is embedded in all health systems worldwide. Number 3, access to mental health support. While the pandemic took a significant toll on the mental health of nurses, they're calling for better access to counseling, therapy, and other support services, independent of a pandemic. This was happening long before the pandemic and will likely persist after the pandemic, right? The pandemic, yes, was a challenging time, but really what happened is it shined a big, bright spotlight on these issues, all right? So nurses are among the high-risk professionals, high-risk trauma exposure professions, right up there with first responders and combat military personnel. Lack of mental health resources and support is a form of avoidable, insufficient resource trauma. Workplace violence and harassment. Well, earlier you heard the statistics. 46% of Canadian nurses have been assaulted 10 or more times. All right, this harassment from patients, visitors, and even colleagues, it impacts well-being and job satisfaction. I have recorded a number of podcasts on this topic. Workplace violence is also a form of avoidable nurse-specific traumatization. Avoidable. And it should be at the top of every employer's list to address a safe workplace for all nurses and other health professionals. Number 5, lack of autonomy and decision-making power. Nurses want to have a greater voice in policy decisions and a more active role in shaping the healthcare system. That has been the case since I entered the profession 50 years ago. This reflects the historical practice of nurses being placed in subordinate, disempowered roles to serve and sacrifice without contributing their vast knowledge, wisdom, and full ability to facilitate healing within the scope of their license. Number 6, continuing education and professional development. This is what the Canadian nurses, like other nurses worldwide, are seeking: the opportunity for ongoing training and skill development and career advancement to enhance their practice. This is an extension of the legacy of historical nurse trauma. There's sort of this implicit barrier that nurses have to overcome to take their rightful position at the decision-making table, even when the nurse is master's or doctorally prepared, which shouldn't matter, but it seems to matter. I know when I went from a master's prepared nurse to a doctorally prepared nurse that I received a different types of invitations and opportunities to speak at the big policy-making table. And it shouldn't be accessible to a select few. We all, each and every nurse, needs to have their voice be heard and their needs be seen and met. Nurses are frequently shut out or denied access to high-level meetings that affect them, such as topics that cover nurse staffing or patient care or safety or quality of care. Why are nurses largely being excluded from these conversations? Well, because it's easier and less expensive for many healthcare organizations to treat nurses like the healthcare wait staff, like in a server role, rather than the essential linchpin that we are to care delivery. The 7th topic that the Canadian nurses have been advocating for is please can we address the nursing staffing shortages and retention. Everywhere on the planet, we have high turnover rates, attrition, retention challenges. I have discussed ad nauseum in prior podcasts about the staffing shortages and all of the unsafe and downright dangerous nurse-patient ratios, the nurse workplace violence, incivility, limited resources, and all the things that inflict trauma by the system rather than prevent it. These and other avoidable nurse-specific trauma exposures are what are driving nurses from the profession. It's not just burnout. Occupational health and safety. That's number 8 on the list, that Ontario and other Canadian nurses are advocating for better protection from not only the physical and biological hazards, such as the risk of musculoskeletal injuries and infectious disease, but also there's other workplace violence. There's also a myriad of other exposures, including EMFs, chemicals, and biological hazards. We're exposed to so much, and in many other occupations, you get you get compensated for that, and well, that's certainly not the case, as we all know here. Number 9 on what nurses need list from Canada is to address the chronic underfunding of the healthcare system. Nurses are concerned about the impact of the healthcare budget cuts on patient care and their working conditions. Now, the Canadian healthcare system, just as a public service announcement here, is a publicly funded Medicare type model, wherein physicians, as is the case here in the United States, are paid on a fee-for-service basis, whereas nurses are compensated by salaries, which highlights the systemic oppression of the nurse role as evidenced by their services not being similarly valued in a fee-for-service model. Interesting. Here we have more historical and avoidable nurse trauma exposure in action. I wonder what healthcare delivery and costs would look like if all interprofessional team members were paid in the same structure. But there are many lobbying groups that are very, very well paid to ensure that never happens. And the last and very important item on the Canadian nurse advocacy list is to really address the lack of diversity and inclusivity in their healthcare systems. You know, nurses want to see more representation and support for marginalized groups within the nursing profession. Nurses from marginalized and underrepresented groups, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ plus individuals, those with disabilities, all of whom are at a higher risk of experiencing psychological trauma in the workplace. The nursing workforce, the nursing, excuse me, my alarm just went off on my phone. The nursing workplace culture and environment play a significant role in promoting or mitigating the risk of nurse psychological trauma. The underrepresentation of these diverse voices and perspectives in nursing leadership and decision-making contribute to a lack of understanding and prioritization of the specific trauma-related needs of nurses from marginalized or oppressed groups. So to sum it all up, the lack of diversity and inclusivity in nursing may exacerbate the intersectional challenges faced by nurses from multiple marginalized groups, leading to even higher risks of cumulative trauma exposures and the health consequences related thereto. So let us take a moment, though, despite all of these challenges, which I am seeing in every country that I have studied, the Ontario Nurses Association advocated and they won their conciliation. They secured a significant victory for registered nurses and registered practical nurses at the Windsor-Essex County Health Unit with a new 3-year collective agreement that addresses these key issues that we've discussed, such as wages that are fair, flexible working hours, and after 2 rounds of conciliation and public information packets, nurses achieved a wage increase of 8.5% over 3 years and secured language around flexible working hours. This victory showcases the power of nurses coming together and advocating for the treatment and compensation that we deserve. Ultimately, this allows all nurses to provide high quality care and fair treatment and compensation. And this benefits all patients and it benefits the organization. The Ontario Nurses Association continues to champion for the rights and well-being of nurses across the province, representing a strong voice for health professionals in various settings. It is clear that nurses in the United States, well, we can learn a great deal from our Canadian counterparts. The challenges faced by the Canadian nurses are very similar to those that we face here in the US. Partnering with and learning from these Canadian nurses, we can gain valuable insights into how to address these common issues in our own advocacy for change in our own healthcare system. This recent victory by the Ontario Nurses Association serves as a powerful example of what can be achieved through collective action and advocacy. Coming together and standing up for their rights, nurses in Canada were able to secure fair wages and improved working conditions. This victory highlights the importance of solidarity and unity among nurses. And that is where doing our own healing work as individuals and as teams and as communities, that's where it leads us, so that we can be synergistically effective as we collaborate, as the nurses in Canada did, to create a stronger, more supportive, and more trauma-informed workplace and healthcare system for us all. So, Canadian nurses, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are so happy for and proud of you. Now it's time for that big, exciting announcement that I teased at the beginning of this episode. This container, Dr. Lorre Laws and the Nurse Trauma Healing container, is expanding, as is this podcast. So I am thrilled to announce that my container is expanding to provide trauma healing podcasts and trauma healing academies for everyone. This podcast will soon be called Trauma Healing with Dr. Lorre, and it will continue to support nurses and other individuals worldwide with essential resources and guidance. But that's not all. I'm going to be adding a Trauma Healing Academy with Dr. Lorre that offers trauma healing services from the intersection of spirituality and science. This academy is now open to adults globally, with plans to serve children and adolescents in the future. The Trauma Healing Academy will draw upon my vast experience as a nurse scholar and educator to deliver comprehensive, evidence-based programs that facilitate holistic, whole person, integrative healing. So whether you are a health professional, a trauma survivor, or simply someone who is seeking personal growth, this academy will give you the tools, the education, the support, and the community that you need to navigate your healing journey. So please stay tuned for updates on the Trauma Healing Academy's curriculum, enrollment, and events. This expansion is such an exciting step forward in my mission to empower people and communities to heal from trauma and cultivate greater well-being, raising the vibration of this planet and all of its inhabitants. I look forward to welcoming you to this transformative new offering. So until next time, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to my nonprofit, the Halen Academy, which we will drop the link in the show notes, so that we may continue to offer trauma healing scholarships for those in need. And if you would like to learn more about how I can serve you or your organization, please schedule a call with me. I'm so accessible and so willing to serve. We'll drop that link in the show notes as well. I have amassed over 5 years of resources and research, and have hundreds and hundreds of resources to support you and your team in the healing process. So until next time, thank you for all that you are and all that you do. I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and I am here for you. Until next time, namaste.